All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. May 18th, a little bit of sunshine here after a long weekend of rain. My name is Eric Myers, Government Affairs Director for Minneapolis Area Realtors. I'd like to thank our sponsors today, Bell Bank and Mortgage, North Star MLS, Royal Credit Union, and Supra. And without their support on this and many other programs, it would be hard for MAR to bring you all the content that it does. So we do appreciate their support. There are parts of this today. We are on a time crunch with the delayed start. We had some tech issues. Zoom wasn't acting the way we anticipated it was today. So I think there's just something out in the ether on Zoom. But hopefully you all can get it. And if not, our backup plan is obviously to have the slides and the recording available in Tray or shortly thereafter. So there are some updates. There's some things going on in government. And things have changed in the last couple weeks. So we're going to focus on some of those, and then some slides I may skip over just because they've been repetitive to this point. But and some of which I've already taken out, but some I've left in. But we're going to intentionally spend a little less time on some slides than others. I'm sure everybody's okay with that. But seriously, just like Amy said, any questions you have, please let us know, and we will do our best to answer those. I've been answering member calls. The membership team, many folks at MAR have been answering member calls on individual situations and where do I find more information about this and things like that throughout this crisis. And we wanted to make sure you continue to have the resources you need for your business. So without further ado, my name is Eric Myers, Director of Government Affairs, bachelor's degree in political science and actively lobbying for 20 years. Representing realtors since February 2008. My approach during the pandemic is to monitor all three levels of government for you and try to bring the most accurate and up-to-date and timely information for you to use for your business and be as knowledgeable as you can on behalf of your clients. The resources haven't changed. The websites, Minneapolis' website, the State Association, and NAR's guidance websites are constantly being updated. There's new material on those every single day. As soon as they get something, they are all three of those levels are putting out new information. Minnesota stay-at-home orders have been transitioned to stay safe. Realtors are essentials. You do need to follow CDC guidelines, and we recommend you avoid negative PR, which was just having too many people appear at an open house or at a property, especially if your name is on the arm sign, that kind of thing. I'm going to talk about foreclosure and eviction suspension later in another slide. There's kind of an update on that. And this stay-at-home order, this bullet just didn't get updated yet. There's another slide on that here, but so we've gone from stay at home to stay safe. Of course, you have all the regular wash your hands, get tested, maintain a distance, wear a mask. One of the things they added was they urge everyone to pay attention to their mental health, and the Minnesota and the state government is offering a link to some support pages here. I think they're concerned about people and where they might be in terms of having dealt with this crisis throughout. Certainly as we all adjust, there's things to be aware of there. And then to be aware of for other folks in our lives and our clients' lives, obviously. But beginning May 18, that's today, non-critical businesses like retail stores, Main Street businesses can reopen if they have a plan for social distancing and can operate at 50% capacity. Starting today, Minnesotans are welcome to gather with family and friends in groups of 10 or less with safe social distancing practices in place. They are looking at, as you all know from the news, they are looking at June 1st for bars, restaurants, barbershops, salons, those things where socially distanced activities are more difficult. So that's kind of where we're at. I mentioned this a slide ago. Peacetime emergency has been extended. The Minnesota Governor Tim Walz Executive Order 2053 has extended the peacetime emergency. Why that's important for realtors is it continues a very important timeline for a previous executive order The previous executive order was Executive Order 20-14, which suspends evictions and writs of recovery during the peacetime emergency. So for the entirety of the peacetime emergency, the Executive Order 2014 putting a moratorium on evictions and writs of recovery is in place. So how long does the peacetime emergency last? Well, currently 2053 has it extended it through June 12th, 2020. So until this executive order is rescinded by the proper authority, or let's see here, let's show my pointer, get some pointer options here. Until it's rescinded or without the proper authority, until it's terminated by either a vote of the legislature with some provisions, this is in place till 2012. It also says that it may be further extended by an executive order before June 12th. So the peacetime emergency is extended through June 12th and may continue beyond that with a new order or new legislation. But the existence of this peacetime emergency keeps the timeline for the suspension of evictions and writs of recovery during the peacetime emergency. This effectively, and you can read these executive orders at this link here to take you to all executive orders, but this effectively means you cannot displace anyone during the peacetime emergency. You can't displace anyone for evictions, and you can't, or foreclosures, and that's a state level order. And details on that are inside the order itself, and the orders can be reviewed at the link below. Okay, so a couple weeks back, you've all seen the dials. This has been Governor Walz's approach. You've got workplace, social, and school settings. A week thereafter, they added curbside pickup, so this dial has moved, and stay at home was still pointed in the downward direction. And now you've seen that single shops have been added, and then gatherings of 10 people or less. So social settings starting to creep up as well. Workplace settings starting to come back around. And you can still see salons, barbershops, and other places where people are in kind of close quarters contact with each other during the delivery of those services have yet to be reopened. Although obviously we anxiously anticipate those openings, looking at June 1st and beyond. So NAR has developed a guide that you can use for discussing foreclosure and forbearance terms, mostly forbearance terms, with your clients. And this is, you go to this link and there's some rules here. You can download the PDF, and then at the bottom of this this two-page, two-sided document, you can include your own picture and contact information and branding materials, so that this looks like it's yours, and you can share it with your clients. You can have it on hand, maybe laminate it to be used in person, or send it out in your email collateral, or forward it to folks that have quick questions for you on which terms their bank may be coming to them and saying, my bank is offering forbearance. I want to know, are the terms they are offering me a good deal? And this guide helps people and helps you to begin to understand where to help folks. So this brochure is really for your use with your consumers. Unemployment, this is the one that I'm going to skip over a little bit. Unemployment and stimulus. I think you all may be familiar with that. I've been answering a number of questions on pandemic unemployment assistance, and we have that in another slide coming up as well. IRS deadline to input your bank routing information for people that have not received a check yet has already passed. Those folks now are set up for paper checks to begin May and June. Some deceased persons have received checks, and the IRS has instructions online about how to repay that from the estate, and what the rules are, and what about a surviving spouse, and what about this, and what about that. All those questions and instructions available at the IRS through this link. And again, we'll make these slides available so you can link directly to them thereafter. Just kind of where we were in terms of unemployment. Here's a 130-year look at unemployment in this country, and you can see that ending April 2020, we were at 14.7% unemployment, and that's starting to compete with the Great Depression at 25.5%. Hopefully with some of these restrictions easing in Minnesota and other states actually being a little bit of ahead of us in terms of easing restrictions, that's not to say that's good, bad, or indifferent, but hopefully some of these numbers rebound quickly and we don't last as long. The duration isn't very long. There are some impacts. Unemployment by race, Hispanics, Blacks, and Asian Americans have been hit harder than white folks. And that those percentages are shown here on this graph from the Department of Labor. So not surprising that populations that in the past have been marginalized and left behind in different areas also were impacted more heavily during this time as well. Not surprising, doesn't mean it's obviously that's not a commentary on the state of that, just advice that it is there. Education level 2, the same thing you might expect. Folks with less than high school are unemployed at a larger degree than folks that graduated high school, and then some folks with college, and then those folks with bachelor's degree and above have weathered better on average in terms of the percentages. Then you can look at how the crisis has hit the economy by sector, and leisure and hospitality, hairdressers, and obviously those folks that still remain closed impact the most. I think if there's any questions to this point, let me just stop briefly. Anyone?
Eric, as of now, I'm not seeing any questions. Anybody got a question for Eric? Just raise your hand or put it in the Q&A box. We'll keep going.
Okay. Pandemic unemployment assistance, 1099 workers have begun to be funded. A number of people in a small cohort that I'm keeping track of just to be able to tell you about their experience have been funded. The Minnesota Department of Employee and Economic Development, has issued guidance on self-employed rights and responsibilities of people in this category. And obviously, DEED says keep reporting weekly earnings, and that earnings may not be equal to or greater than the PUA formula. So if you are making $800 a week on pandemic unemployment assistance, and you then on a week upcoming have earnings that equal or exceed that your PUA funding amount, then you would report in that given week through the reporting structure on the website, but it's going to have an impact on whether you get funded that week with unemployment assistance. The very next week, if you have no income that week, go back in, re-enter the information, and you may be funded again. A lot of information, a full page of guidance on this one is available on the website with this link here. So I'll just put that in. Ooh.
Eric? Yep. It looks like we do have a question from Victor. He's asking how they can benefit from the SBA funding.
Yeah, SBA is upcoming, so let's cover that first. But we'll move on from pandemic unemployment. Pandemic unemployment, there was a question on the state association's website. I'm receiving benefit now. What happens if I close on a transaction? And the answer is unemployment insurance benefit eligibility is determined weekly, and we just covered that. So weekly, you go in, you say, I either do or don't have income to report this week, and it may impact how much you are funded. Full guidance, again, available at the link below. Congress did pass a bill to refill PPP. We are on round 2 of PPP. Important to remember that PPP is a brand new recent invention. This program didn't exist prior to the pandemic. $484 billion has been poured back into the bill, and $60 billion of it was granted for small emergency through community banks and small lenders. So SBA program, You've got the PPP, and then you've got the standard EIDL. EIDL existed prior to the pandemic. PPP did not. Small businesses, sole proprietors, independent contractors, and the self-employed. Businesses with less than 500 employees, sole proprietors, independent contractors. Much of the same uses, but not exactly. And then more on the amounts, the limits, 2.5 times average monthly payroll, and then an amount over here that's kind of fixed amount, not a calculated amount, and then fixed interest rate, 1%, 3.75% over here, terms, other information. On PPP, you do have to keep people employed for 8 weeks, and you cannot reduce staffing levels to below 75% or 75% FTE. And then there are other terms on the EIDL side as well. PPP is administered through your local bank or credit union, and EIDL through the SBA directly through the website. With that, can you restate that question, Amy?
Yeah, how can they benefit from the SBA loan was the question.
So both of these programs have been available for a few weeks now. A number of realtors have been funded through the PPP loans. Other entities have been funded through the PPP loans, and they are able to make their payroll and keep people on. PPP is eligible for self-employed are eligible for PPP loans. There was a question I received this week, and I've checked with NAR. The question was regarding some guidance on whether once their SBA PPP loan has been funded, can they write themselves a check directly to cover the cost of their own payroll? How does that impact the forgiveness aspects? Remember, the PPP loan, if you follow all the criteria and can certify that the use was all correct and categorized and explain it all back, then a portion up to including 100% is forgivable of that loan. So you wouldn't necessarily end up having to make loan repayments. Now, if there's a calculation and the certification and there's some lesser thereof amounts or a percentage by which is forgivable and a percentage that is not, then that remaining principal will be owed based on these terms. So I do know of a number of realtors that have been funded through PPP, and they've been using it for their business so far. Some guidance on PPP. The first round of PPP, we don't have an updated list yet, but the first round before Congress refilled it, 33,819 emergency loans had been funded in Minnesota for $7.6 billion, or 7% of the total funds. That was first round. The SBA had extended a new deadline. It had a deadline for Safe Harbor of last week on May 14th. They extended a new deadline for Safe Harbor through today. So businesses that had taken the PPP under certain rules and under certain good faith efforts that now need to return it, or have wished to return it, or do not wish to have the loan further, or maybe they weren't eligible altogether, have a Safe Harbor deadline of through the end of today to actually return it. And some businesses, you may see reporting on that, have taken that up. So after the deadline, if a business knowingly took it and shouldn't have taken it, there's potential penalties and then remedies for those penalties. So, but this Safe Harbor gives everybody the benefit of the doubt. And there's more information on this rule if people have questions about it at this link here from the National Law Review. Other CARES Act provisions. Student loans have been delayed. Federal student loans, no payments for 6 months, no interest, no penalties. There are special rules on accessing retirement funds. If you've redone your budget for the pandemic and you're still, running a gap, you may consider accessing retirement funds. You're going to want to reach out reach out to your plan administrator and your tax advisor before you consider taking those funds. But there have been some changes to that. The charitable deduction for 2020 has been increased from 0 to 300, and for those that do not itemize. And then there are some benefits for employers in terms of the employee retention credit and the delay of employee payroll taxes. And then a lot of federal tax deadlines have been extended to July 15th as well. The tax deadline, the 1031 deadline, the tax opportunity zones deadlines, and more. So, any questions there so far?
I think we're good to go. You're covering a lot of good information.
Great, thank you so much. Minnesota legislature, we learned last week that a $1 billion surplus has become a $2.426 billion deficit. It's a just under $4 billion swing. 3.6 billion was the swing. Over the weekend, today's the last day for the legislature to act, although they can't actually act today. Talk about that in a second. But over the weekend, there was a battle over the bonding bill. Bonding usually pays for roads, bridges, and other critical state infrastructure. The House attempted to pass a $2 billion bonding bill over on Saturday, and that failed. The Senate attempted to pass a $1 billion bonding bill on Sunday, and that failed. In both bodies, a supermajority is required. And the Minnesota House has 134 members. That means 81 members need to vote to approve a bonding bill. That means it needs more. With current ratios in the House, the Minnesota House is currently run by Democrats. This means that of 134 members, 81 members in the House is what's necessary to pass a bonding bill. And so that's part of the story on the failure there. So you needed broad bipartisan support and a supermajority to pass it, and it failed in both bodies. The legislature technically is meeting today, but it cannot act today. If it did so, if the legislature were to act today, then the governor has the ability to do something called a pocket veto, and then we're getting in some really interesting civics areas. But they can't pass anything today. The state constitution kind of anticipates and protects the people from the legislature letting everything run up to the last day and then basically having the legislature sneak things through. So the state constitution considers that and has rules in place that don't allow it. The undone list so far is the bonding bill. What to do about state workers and their pay raise a pay raise ratification. It's an up or down vote. Some pay raises were already in place to go up in July, but they needed House and Senate ratification, but they didn't get it. So big question mark here in terms of those pay raises for some state workers that would have received them in July. Legislative oversight of the Federal CARES Act. A lot of the programs so far come from the Federal CARES Act, and it gives money directly to the states. So they didn't get final legislative bill passed that would have created the oversight. So that's undone. And then economic aid, tax relief for the pandemic. Special session is all but a given now. It likely will occur. The governor has the right to call a special session. The legislature has the right to adjourn a special session whenever they want. The governor can call them in as soon as it's over. He could call them at any point in the future. They can come in and adjourn immediately thereafter if they want, or they could go on and on and on for months and never adjourn. It's up to them. So he can open it, they can close it. The state budget is $3.6 billion. The revenue projections have been impacted by income amounts, sales tax amounts, corporate amounts have all been lower, and for a total of $3.6 billion net negative change. You can see the budgetary surplus, the reduction in revenue, the estimated spending. This number is up $391 million because of the pandemic. And then you've got projected reserve for 63 million. This is not the rainy day fund. This is the stadium reserve. So when you total this positive balance with all of these, you get a budgetary balance in the negative of 2.426 billion. Now next, during the Dayton administration, the legislature and the governor created a $2.359 billion budget reserve. So these funds remain available to mitigate the impact of those budgetary shortfalls. But if you notice, they're not on this line, and they don't automatically apply to this number here. And the reason is that they are available to mitigate the impact to the hole in the state's budget, but it has to actually be appropriated to do so. And that would be part of a global agreement at the legislature and any fight towards the finish they may have on that. Additionally, they don't technically need to balance the budget in 2020. They would need to balance the budget by the end of the 2021 session. So it's not necessarily an immediate item on their list, although good budgeting and good stewardship of the state budget kind of requires that, since they went from a surplus to a deficit, that they take action sooner than later. But technically, they are not required to act to the end of the 2021 session. The Minneapolis City Council, this hasn't changed from the last couple of weeks. They're operating with a smaller committee structure. They've enacted a hiring freeze and a wage freeze that will save $6 million, and they've delayed several large purchases. I think the impacts to state and local governments across the country are going to change the political landscape and what is and isn't done at the local level for many years to come. And so I just leave this slide in there in terms of that. A couple weeks ago, there was a call for a rent strike. And so there are people out there saying that we should just outright cancel rents. So be aware of that. And then emerging and evolving issues. There is a discussion about a second round of stimulus. There's the federal act that passed, a proposed legislation that was passed over the weekend by the U.S. House of Representatives. It had a $3 trillion price tag. It's called the HEROES Act. I hope to have a summary in today's tray for you as well. If not, there will be a summary slide on that bill for next week's PowerPoint. But I do have to mention that the Senate has not acted yet, and it's not likely to act favorably on that entire package. So, but it is important to know what's in that package to see what's still even on the table, and to see how the House and Senate work together or don't work together to try to come to some sort of solution. So we are still waiting for more federal guidance on foreclosures and evictions. A lot of that has to do that banks are federally chartered, and then those federal banking rules apply, and it's harder for state to state to have different rules, except for the current moratorium on writs of recovery, and then private contracts. So really, the banks are going to reach out to your consumers and say, here are the terms, we offer this forbearance, would you accept this or that kind of thing. And that should be working directly with consumers to get those things in place if there's help that's needed. Looking for more state guidance on foreclosures and evictions. There's been some local pressure to act. And then I mentioned the intersection of policy programs, PPP, EIDL, pandemic unemployment assistance, 1099 workers. These two programs were brand new. This one has been in place for a long time, but these programs have been running at high speed over the last few weeks, and the regulations on these programs changes it seems like every single day or every other day. So we're trying to keep up on these regulations. We're trying to get the answers from NAR, and as soon as we have them, we'll get them to you as well. The state legislature and Congress is looking at increased pay or other benefits that they can forward on to frontline workers, and because they know how hard they've been worked during this crisis. So with that, my name is Eric Myers, Government Affairs Director for the Minneapolis Area Realtors. We did want to leave time for some questions, so we have about 10 minutes for questions here today. I do want to thank again Bell Bank and Mortgage, North Star MLS, Rural Credit Union, and Supra for continuing to sponsor this program. And with that, are there any other questions?
I want to follow up on that and also say thank you to our sponsors. It's great to have them participate with MAR. And also, Eric, it's also to have you holding the pulse of all this government affairs and all the latest and greatest. I do see one question. Let's see, where can they get the copy of the slides with the links? Great question, Mark. Those can be found on MAR's website. And if you have any questions, as Eric had mentioned earlier today, feel free to reach out to him throughout the week. He's very easily accessible and happy to help. So we are lucky to have him on staff at MAR. Let's see if there's any other questions. Let's see, Kath is asking, any info on cities opening up and point of sale inspections?
You know, that's a good question, and I appreciate Kath. Kath had prompted us on the initial front end to call through about 16 or so local cities that have point of sale ordinances, sewer lateral ordinances, anything with a pre-sale inspection program. And we went through and updated that list at that time, right at the beginning of this crisis. And some cities have fallen into 3 different buckets. I mentioned this for anyone that has an upcoming closing, and you think to yourself, oh shoot, I forgot such and such city had a point of sale, or such and such city had a sewer lateral inspection ordinance. It's easy to forget that those programs exist and that they're still necessary. But we did call through and find out what the status was for most of those communities. It was 3 buckets. There was a lot of business as usual, so no interrupted services. And then the other 2 buckets were some combination of a hybrid, just so some of them were business as usual with some changes like extended wait times or contact us first or something like that. And then some, just a couple, not very many out of the 16 were no further inspections at this time, not necessary. And one of them was requiring an escrow in the meantime. It might be very much time this week and into next week to call through those communities again and to see what the updates are specifically for those last 2 buckets. Obviously, business as usual bucket isn't going to change to anything else, but the other 2 buckets may move back to business as usual. So probably this week, we'll start to call through again and make sure we have answers for our realtors so that they know what to expect when interacting in those communities. We do always want realtors to follow city ordinances and always be in compliance with those. So we want to give you the best guidance possible. Thanks for that, Kath. I appreciate it.
Very good. I also want to call out, Carson's got a question, it looks like, on if any of the other realtors are hearing about UEM.
Unemployment insurance?
Yeah, that may be more to the group, but have you heard of any, Eric, of realtors getting
Yeah, I
UEM?
do know a number of realtors that have been funded already for unemployment insurance through the pandemic unemployment assistance. So yeah, I know some that are probably now a couple 3 weeks into their being funded.
Okay, he's responding that he's only heard of them getting 0.
Yeah, initially before the rules were in place, a lot of people were getting a 0 amount because the rules hadn't been adopted yet from the federal government down to the states. I haven't heard too many people tell me that their answer was 0 after the state went through and determined that they were eligible. So interesting to note.
Yeah.
If anyone else in the group has an experience to share and wants to put that in the chat, I'd be happy to read it or have Amy read it to the group, or people could unmute themselves or however.
Any other questions from the group? These are good questions. Eric, do you know what was decided about your webinar for next week? Not to put you on the spot. Next Monday is Memorial Day, so the offices will be closed. Do you know what was decided?
I don't know if we're going to move it to Tuesday at 1 o'clock or if it's just not going to be held at all.
Okay.
And
We'll keep everybody posted. Whatever's decided. Looks like we've got one other question for you from Carrie Lynn. Are you
Tuesday.
Collect PPP if you aren't an LLC or an S Corp?
Yeah, you should. Yes, you should be able to. As far as I know, the self-employed are, and you don't necessarily for PPP. For pandemic unemployment assistance, obviously you can. For PPP, I believe you can as well. So, but we're waiting on further guidance. There was a question last week that I took to NAR, came from one of our members. It said, the person said, well, what do I do now? It looks like my SBA PPP loan has been funded and it's going to be in my account soon. And when I do I just go ahead and write myself a payroll check and replace that income through that loan approval? And then is that going to be considered forgivable? Is that a qualified expense? On and on and on. And we asked that question of NAR. NAR asked every member of their subject matter expert team. Nobody had the answer yet. They went back to Treasury and to the SBA and asked the same question, and SBA and Treasury didn't have an answer yet. So this is that last slide item where I was talking about where some of these programs, the program was instituted so quickly that the regulations on the program are trying to catch up. So as soon as we have an answer on that one, and I checked in with Patrick from NAR this morning, and there still wasn't an answer on it yet. As soon as we have an answer on that one, we'll post it and make it widely known for the group and others. So.
Very good. Any other questions out there? Well, we are thankful you guys joined us today. As we said, reach out to Eric if you have any other additional questions. But Eric, thanks for some great information as always.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
You MAR members with us today, have a great week.
Yep, and I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us, and we'll make those slides available. And please continue to be the expert resource in your office to help get this information out to a wider audience. We've got 10,000 members, and they all kind of need to know this stuff. And when you guys ask great questions, it's probably because 10 other people have the same questions. So please be the purveyor of this information in your office. Thank you so much.